People don't like the word compliance. The fragmented, chaotic, underfunded mental health system is not the individual's fault. And so compliance shouldn't be how we think about things. They preferred the word non-adherent. They felt it was a less judgmental way to think about participating in treatment. Non-adherence is a conversation. It's not a finger wag. I think there's some value in how you think about this and how you talk about this. And that starts with listening to real people and the themes that they want to hear.
Welcome to Hope Starts With Us, a podcast by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. My name is Dan Gillison. I'm the CEO of NAMI. Now, let me tell you why we started this podcast. We did that because we believe that hope starts with us. Hope starts with us talking about mental health. Hope starts with us making information accessible. Hope starts with us providing resources and practical advice. Hope starts with us sharing our stories, and hope starts with us breaking the stigma. If you or a loved one is struggling with a mental health condition and have been looking for hope, we made this podcast for you. Hope starts with all of us. Hope is a collective. We hope that each episode, with each conversation, brings you into that collective so you know you are not alone. Let me introduce our guest, NAMI's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ken Duckworth. He's first of all a member of NAMI's senior leadership team. He's been an incredible ally to NAMI for years and years, and he's worked with us since 2003. He's a double board certified psychiatrist in adult and child and adolescent psychiatry. He is the author of NAMI's first book, You Are Not Alone, the NAMI Guide to Navigating Mental Health. And the paperback is out on the 14th of January. So now this episode, we're highlighting NAMI Schizophrenia and the Psychosis Lexicon Guide. And there's 5 elements inside of it we really want to focus on. It initiates crucial conversations about schizophrenia and psychosis. It highlights the impact of precise and empathetic language in mental health. It's constructed for broad audiences, suitable for clinicians, journalists, family members, and more. It's aiming to combat stigma associated with these mental illnesses. And last, it encourages understanding and respect supported by lived experiences of those living with or supporting someone with schizophrenia or psychosis. So that as the backdrop and the setup. Now let's get to Dr. Duckworth. So this is the opportunity, Ken, for us to explore the process of creating the Lexicon Guide. Tell us a little bit about how the project got started, what inspired the need for the NAMI Schizophrenia and Psychosis Lexicon Guide.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's great to be a guest on Hope Starts With Us. So the Lexicon Guide is just emblematic of what's so cool about being NAMI's doc. A partner came to us and said, how do we talk to people about schizophrenia and psychosis? We said, well, it's funny you should ask, because we have the authority, power, and privilege to pull together focus groups of people from our community and listen to what they said. And so the Lexicon Guide is a collection of about 60 people, 6 different focus groups. We also talk to some professionals, and it's a guideline for how you might talk about schizophrenia. When a clinician is talking to somebody and taking care of them, listening to their language is critical and using their language is critical. So it's not prescriptive. It's rather a thematic series of themes that we picked up from people. People don't like the word compliance. I have some gray hair, Dan, and I was trained with no alliance, no compliance, which was a clever way to tell people if you had a relationship, they would take your treatments or medicines. Being non-compliant isn't great, and everybody has missed their medicines at least once. And so they preferred the word non-adherent or adherent. They felt it was a less judgmental way to think about participating in treatment. So similarly, people said, they liked a person living with schizophrenia. that separates the person from the illness process. They wanted us to use person-first language. They, of course, didn't like a lot of things that you would predict they wouldn't like, being defined by their illness, schizophrenia, as an adjective, schizophrenic. But interestingly, they also didn't like some language that we NAMI once used, which is why this experience is a continuous learning adventure. People didn't like the term brain disease, which was an effort NAMI made to have mental health conditions more connected to medical conditions. This was in the pre-parity days. Everybody felt that we were not on the same footing as medical problems. One way to try to do that, one effort, this is the decade of the brain, postage stamp in the 1990s, right? The decade that's doubled the NIMH research budget, all of which was accomplished by NAMI's advocates. But the idea of a brain disorder wasn't as appealing to people. So this is something we learn from listening. And the joy of NAMI is we're in a position to pull people together and to ask them how they think about it and how they would like to talk about it.
Thank you. And as you mentioned that, Ken, one of the things that you've kept in front of us and kept on our front windshield is empathetic care. How do you bring empathy into the work? Could you speak to that in conjunction with the guide? And you were pretty much saying it. I just would love for you to kind of expand on it a little bit.
Well, humility and listening are two things that NAMI's very good at. And we pulled people together, these focus groups, and we said, what would be helpful to talk about schizophrenia? We asked caregivers, family members, would you like to be called caregivers? Is there another term? Oh, well, we're not too sure about care partners because that implies that we might be romantically involved, but this is my son and I'm attending to him. So it's just helpful to listen. So I like the humility of actually asking people instead of making pronouncements and saying, here's the way it ought to be. The Lexicon Guide is on our website. It's easily downloadable. It's not too long. And it just gives some general thematic approaches to talking about schizophrenia, psychosis, becoming a caregiver, and things like adherence to treatment. These are all things that people wanted to talk about. So I think it's extremely respectful and empathic to listen to people. Now, if you're their doctor, you'd want to listen to how they think about it. What are the words that they use? What's important to them? But this would be kind of broad strokes. Some people find certain language offensive, and it's important for us to know that. And how did we learn that? Well, we did the way we do everything at NAMI. We use lived experience as our guide. What has it been like for you living with schizophrenia? What's it been like for you as a caregiver? And this is why NAMI is so fabulous and so successful, because we have an army of people across America and just about 700 affiliates who are ready to step up and help out with important questions like this. This is actually a question that hadn't really been asked. And so that's why I was proud of the Lexicon Guide. I want to emphasize my team did this work. Ken was off traveling, promoting our book. I knew of it. I was in support of it. Ken did not attend any of the focus groups. NAMI is very much a team sport. This is Terry Brister, Elizabeth Stafford, Jesse Walthall, people who were pulling this together. Leah Wentworth pulled together a contract with a group that helped us with these focus groups, but with the very clear charge and feedback process. So everything in NAMI is done, as a team, and I think there's a lot to be proud of. And this report came out 2023, is free. It's available. Take a look at it. See how you think we did. I'm Ken at NAMI.org if you want to send me an email. If you have another idea for a topic, this is all kind of an organic flow of ideas and information between the NAMI National Office and our many affiliates and states. And I like it that way.
So what I also love about this, Ken, is that as you mentioned, and we set it up in terms of the conversation, that this guide is for a really broad audience. So clinicians, journalists, family members, and more. So if we were to drill down and think about that clinician and something they haven't had, an asset, a tool that they haven't had before, how does a clinician interact with this? How would you suggest they interact?
Well, take a look at it. People tend to not like schizophrenia be described as a brain disease, which is something that NAMI used to promote. And again, you've got to own your L's. You've got to own them. We're human. We're trying to do the best we can. But I don't think we'd asked people, how do you feel about the term brain disorder, brain disease? People felt that was tagging them with a lifelong disability, right? So that's really interesting because there are many clinicians that are probably using that language. And you should just know that some audiences won't like that very much. And they'll want some hope, affirmation, strengths integrated into those remarks if you're going to make them. And while it is a brain-based disorder, it's not necessarily how people want to hear it. And so I think that's valuable for the clinician. I think the family members will see themselves in this report. They've had their children or parents being called non-compliant when they couldn't get a pharmacist to give them the meds, or their insurance did a prior auth. The doctor didn't get the paperwork in on time. It doesn't make you non-compliant, which does imply a kind of defiance. The fragmented, chaotic, underfunded mental health system is not the individual's fault. And so compliance shouldn't be how we think about things. There also might be a very good reason that people aren't taking their medicine. And that's a good question for clinicians. It's causing weight gain. I don't feel right on it. I've lost some of my emotional range. I feel dissociated from my experience. Some people report this on antidepressants. Non-adherence is a conversation. It's not a finger wag of you are non-compliant. And so I think there's some value in how you think about this and how you talk about this. And that starts with listening to real people and the themes that they want to hear.
Ken, thanks for sharing that. I'll share very quickly that my primary care physician I'd known for, probably by this time, maybe 20 years, he'd been trying to get me to take a medication for years. And he kept saying, are you? And so year after year, and he finally said to me, he says, I've been doing this, and I've been talking to you. Can I just stop for a second and ask you why? Why not? So that was such an interesting approach that he took that changed the dynamic for me. And he had never actually done that. And all of a sudden, I don't know whether it was a light bulb that went off, but he finally stopped and asked me why.
Oh, see, that's good doctoring.
That's good doctoring.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I take a medicine every night. And when I forget it once in a while, and do I have high blood pressure because I had twins, because I work for NAMI, or because I'm fighting against the mental health fragmentation machine? My blood pressure is not bad, actually, but I take a medicine because my doctor is very conscientious. When I miss a dose because I'm distracted, I'm not non-compliant, right? I missed a dose. It wasn't my intention to miss it. And I'm so glad the doctor talked to you. And so it's important to think of yourself as a partner in this whole informed consent process. And I'll just mention that we testified before the FDA that people should be allowed to make their own decisions around the decision to take clozapine, which is an underutilized, amazing compound, which has helped so many people. I've gotten so many hugs at NAMI conventions because I suggested that they look at clozapine. I can't prescribe things. I can't become medical treatment, and I can't really give capital A advice, but could you look into clozapine because your son or daughter's been on 13 medicines? There's only one medicine that's FDA approved for treatment-resistant schizophrenia. That's clozapine. We don't understand why, but there was a very restrictive set of rules around it. So many people, including NAMI, testified that people should have the dignity to take their own risk. This was something a patient once said to me. I was reviewing the risks and benefits of some medicine or another. I can't even remember. I was at the mental health center. It was a long time ago. And he said, Dr. Ken, there's dignity in taking my own risks. That always stuck with me. Because again, like the lexicon guide, he has a lot of power. How he wants to think about his life. How does he want to talk about his experience, or in this case, his illness, or in this case, the risks he's willing to take to deal with it. And I loved that. And so I feel like there's really important messages in listening to people and helping them make shared decisions. When your doctor asked you why you had been reluctant to take that medicine, he was treating you with respect. He was saying to you, what am I missing? Instead of me just pounding on the nail with the hammer again. Why don't I ask you, how come? And that's what I call great doctoring. Love to hear that.
Well, and speaking of that, you were mentioning some of the things that we've gotten wrong in terms of NAMI and owning it, and then what we're doing now. And one of the things that I remember is hearing as the opportunity has presented itself, the person that says, I have, and we said, no, you live with. And just that simple, framing of it.
People really didn't like I suffer from.
Right.
Right? So, a well-meaning person might say, Bob suffers from schizophrenia. Well, when we ask people in a focus group, they said, hey, that's not how I think about it. This is part of something I got to deal with, just like you got to deal with whatever you're dealing with, whether it's, a medical problem or some other life problem. It's not definitional. And you're not suffering. Suffering's not the only experience I have with it. And he might say, I might even suffer sometimes with it. But that's not the definition of it for me.
So picking up on that, I want to ask you a question here. What role does personalized engagement with patients historically hold in treatment plans? And how would you like to see this change or expand in the future?
Well, access is such a challenge to care. People really do struggle to get access. And this is both a mental health parity problem, a workforce problem. So if you find a clinician who's actually interested in you and you connect with, make sure you leverage that, because that person may not be there in 5 years. They may be on a different assignment or paying off a different student loan debt at a different federal, health center, whatever their story is. I think it's just important to remember that respect is the basis of the alliance. And a therapeutic alliance is critical. The literature actually has taught us that the kind of relationship you have with, let's say, a therapist is as important as the kind of therapy they're doing. So there's a big, movement, exposure response prevention for OCD. Bing. Okay, that's true. Cognitive behavior therapy for anxiety and depression. Bing. There's some truth there. Cognitive work on psychosis. Kate Hardy at Stanford. Okay, great. But the relationship with the person is as important as the type of therapy. There are some therapies that are specific, and I've just mentioned a few of them. But the relationship, the quality, as assessed by you, is as important as most of the subtypes of psychotherapy. So it's an interesting and powerful, takeaway. So instead of asking the person, do you do EMDR for acute trauma? Well, that is a specific treatment that has a literature and is approved by the VA for acute trauma. You may also discern, do they treat you respectfully? Do they look you in the eye? Are they staring at the computer the whole time? Do they seem genuinely connected to you in some way? Do you feel safe with them? Because safety is going to help you get through, your work in EMDR dealing with the trauma.
So as we talk about it, what are some of the future applications that you see this guide could have?
Well, I encourage people to take a look at it and send me an email if you want to talk about it, ken@nami.org. This is a vanity license plate. I have an agreement, as you know, Dan, with NAMI that no one named Ken can ever work at NAMI, because ken@nami.org, it's just something about it, right? No Kendra, no Mackenzie, no Kendall, nobody. So, just take a look at it, because it's not a long read. And it's actual evidence from real people, which you don't get much of. When I proposed to write our first book, and I want to thank you, Dan, for your support of that project, which was the first time I ever met you, I pitched you this idea, and you said, go. And what's interesting is 5 publishers bid on our book, and they had never imagined that real people would share what they had learned. They also used their names. And what I have learned at NAMI is a continuous learning process for me. Okay, fine, I picked up some things, in my training, but I picked up a lot learning from NAMI. People want to leverage their experience to help other people. That's a powerful way to use what you've been through. And so it wasn't hard for me to find 130 people, but that was novel. The idea that a psychiatrist would give people the platform and tell us what they had learned. Can you imagine a world where nobody ever asked a mother what she had learned attending to her child with schizophrenia for 20 years? Nobody'd ever asked somebody what they had learned from being bounced from diagnosis to diagnosis. Like, how did you come to terms with that? You lived with bipolar disorder for a decade. What have you picked up so far? Nobody ever asked that question. Now, my daughters did tell me that I was a very master of the obvious person. Obvious, Dad. Your book is very obvious. And, guys, thanks. I'll take being master of the obvious if it's a question that the field wouldn't ask. And this is how it connects to the lexicon guide. The field didn't sit down with 60 people who live with schizophrenia and the people who love them and ask them, how do you like to talk about it? What are helpful ways to think about it? What are harmful ways to talk about it? And then we record those and we publish them. That's the same little genius that's in our book, which is that real people have actually learned things that can't be found in randomized controlled trials. I trained in all these fancy programs. Nobody ever told me that a dog could help you regulate your moods. Why, you go to bed when the dog goes to bed. You walk the dog when you need to walk the dog. Dog eats, you eat. That this is a way to regulate. Nobody ever told me that. Nobody ever told me that paper plates could be a way to help manage your kitchen when you're raising young kids with a mental health condition. No one ever told me in my training that becoming a peer could transform your experience by serving others. Nobody ever really taught me about family to family in my formal training and how transformational that has been in so many marriages, relationships, and lives. And so this is kind of what I wanted to do in the book. And you can see a reflection of that on the lexicon guide. Let's ask actual people who are living with this. This is the power of NAMI. And this is why I'm so proud to be the chief medical officer.
We absolutely appreciate it. And we see this guide as another tool in the toolbox. It is an asset of real lived experience. So when someone sees the information in the guide, actually reads the information in the guide, it will help them navigate in a very productive and positive way. So thank you for your leadership with it. And as we've indicated, that folks can find the guide at NAMI.org/SCZ Lexicon. That's where you can find the guide. And Dr. Ken has told you how you can reach him. So as we do the wrap up, one of the things I wanted to do, Ken, is we always ask our guests at the end of the podcast the following. The world can be a difficult place, and it sometimes can be hard to hold on to hope. That's why with each episode, we dedicate the last couple of minutes of the podcast to a special segment called Hold On to Hope. Ken, as we're navigating things right now that we're seeing across the United States, what helps you, Dr. Ken, hold on to hope?
Yeah, it is a difficult time, and I want to acknowledge that. I think one of the most important things is just to acknowledge the reality. We're a politically divided country. The wildfires in Los Angeles, catastrophic for so many people. We're having difficulty managing the climate. There's a lot of acrimony. So, there's a lot of heartache out there. So I gather strength from the NAMI community. I just heard a presentation from the NAMI helpline, an incredible service to people who are calling, waiting for someone to talk, to listen to them, to connect with them. It's 1-800-950-NAMI. It's one of the most important phone numbers you can have. And, we have 300 volunteers. I want you to think about that. These are people who are into service as love. And, I'm just so proud to be affiliated. Anytime I'm in the office, I try to hang out with the helpline because they're like so good for me and my little spirit and sense of hope. I also do find nature to be healing for me. I try to wander in the woods. I live near a park. That's just me, Ken, because it reminds me that there's a lot of this world that is bigger than me. And it kind of puts my own perspective of our troubles into some perspective. The Japanese call this forest bathing. I call it walking in the woods. But, there's some literature that suggests it's good for people's mental health. And you don't need a fancy amount of equipment or anything. You just get up and go. If you can walk, you can go. And so that happens to be a source of support for me the natural world, but the spirit of NAMI is a spirit that runs through me, and I get a lot of satisfaction and hope from that.
Keep walking, keep doing, keep being kin. And I just want to end with the following. First of all, I hope that the Schizophrenia and Psychosis Lexicon Guide is used as a resource by clinicians, law enforcement, and everyone else who interacts with individuals living with these mental health conditions to lessen stigma surrounding the condition and its symptoms. Now, this has been Hope Starts With Us, a podcast by NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. If you are looking for mental health resources, you are not alone. To connect with the NAMI helpline and find local resources, visit nami.org/help. Text helpline to 62640 or dial 800-950-NAMI or 6264 as Ken just mentioned. Or if you are experiencing an immediate suicide, substance use, or mental health crisis, please call or text 988 to speak with a trained support specialist or visit 988lifeline.org. I'm Dan Gillison, your host. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for listening, and be well.